The real benefit of Addressable is we can talk more specifically to specific consumers about the things that are important for them. So for example, there could be two different people who eat Hunt's tomatoes. Maybe one is more highly interested in organic tomatoes and the other one is more interested in cooking. We can serve the right messages to the right people at the right time, and that's where the huge upside is. There's a variety of ways we get this information. Some of it we get through our partners. Sometimes we buy the data, like retail POS data. Sometimes it's based on our learnings from our own experiences, like for example, people going to our websites and checking out a certain kind of recipe or something like that. So it comes from a variety of different sources. I think the key thing is just looking for it and asking the questions, because it's probably out there somewhere. It's just having a lot of due diligence and not giving up at the first sign of resistance. So when you look at a lot of CPG categories, sometimes the penetration is quite small. So it could be it's not necessarily the most affluent consumer. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. But I think the interesting thing is, when you're looking at relatively low penetration brands, I think a lot of times there's an opportunity to go in specifically and just reach the people who are that are most interested in that, or it's most appropriate for with Addressable.
Tell us a little bit about how you guys come up with with a strategy for Addressable versus a more conventional buy, and what are some of the factors involved?
It's usually we'll look at what a brand's business objectives are, and how we want to connect with the consumers there, and kind of what the key drivers are. And if that ends up being a situation where Addressable could be a solve, if it's a very discrete consumer group and there's very discrete messaging for them, we'll oftentimes pursue it.
Cool. And what about pricing? How does that work out in terms of Addressable campaigns and pricing and ROI?
Yeah, so we try to look at the latter, which is, so we look at CPMs and we look at the price we pay for a variety of media, not just Addressable, but TV and digital and other things too. When things are new, like Addressable TV, we don't tend to focus on pricing as much as kind of how the system works and what the results are, and then we make a call later on. So I'm not saying it gets a complete hall pass, but pricing isn't the key driver. It's one of the considerations going in. And then what we do with things like Addressable TV is run water through the pipes a few times with different brands, figure out what works, and then do a full evaluation on how effective it is, which includes price.
Let's talk about where you guys buy the Addressable. You have so many options. There's obviously the food networks of various lifestyles. How do you kind of figure out which programming you want to buy?
It depends on what the objectives are and what our messaging is. Sometimes it's more contextual if we want to go into a certain environment. Sometimes the environment isn't as big of a deal as the aperture of the people we're going after. So it kind of varies based on a brand by brand basis. But it's good to have the options, because I think the more different factors you can affect, the more effective your plan will be. The interesting thing about using Addressable is we have more exposure opportunities on a given night with certain households, because when we buy Addressable, we're not necessarily doing it on a network by network basis. We're saying instead, we want to target this household that night regardless of what they're watching. So in a traditional media buy, if we would have said, hey, we're usually on the Food Network, USA Network, Turner, those guys, but we don't buy ESPN and History, if that household that night happens to be watching ESPN and History and we've triggered an addressable buy there, then we could expose them, whereas we might have not exposed them otherwise. So I think our ongoing relationship's a little bit deeper in the households with Addressable, just because of the Addressable household. It's driven more by the people, not as much by the media. We, like a lot of other CPGs, still use mixed modeling to assess our effectiveness. So we've managed to work with our Addressable partners in putting their inputs into the mixed models, and they've turned out to be pretty effective. We get a good return on it.